Good evening, everyone. Welcome. So I thought I would start off with how the strikes may impact things. And the main reason I thought I would lead with this one, we'll go over any other questions people have after a while, was because there's a couple of things I think of note. One of which is the position with Labour, because people were saying, oh, what's this thing with Labour? Has Keir Starmer got his strategy with the strikes right? And I thought I'd get this out of the way now, because all through this week, when I've tried to sort of stick it into the schedule, it's like other things keep happening. I thought with it being sometimes in summer, it's there isn't lots and lots of government type news being thrown up, whereas at the moment there is. So yeah. So I thought I would go through that first of all. So we'll go that 15 20 minutes, and then we'll see what from there, because I'll do this one really quickly. Out of the Tory leadership candidates, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, who do I think would be worse for the country? Liz Truss, I think, would be worse. At the same time, even Rishi Sunak has now had to abandon the he's had to lurch to the right himself. He was going to draw a distinction between himself and Liz Truss, and he seems to have abandoned that now in favour of just going absolutely mental. Okay, the cat has been sat here for absolutely ages and has now decided that now is the time to get out of this room. One moment while I let her out before she scratches her way through the door. You are a pain in the arse. I've probably knocked everything everywhere. Right, we're back. Right, in terms of cats, that's what cats do. I would never choose to have a cat. They're arseholes. They're always arseholes. But yes, so strike action. So I'll go through the Labour thing first of all, because really it should be a much bigger problem for the Conservatives, because they're the ones in power. But so Keir Starmer adopted this position. I'll go through my thoughts on this. Keir Starmer adopted this position of the front bench Labour MPs shouldn't be on the picket line. And the reason for that is that if they were in government, they wouldn't be on the picket line. Some backbench MPs could be if they want, but the government mustn't be. And the reason for that is in an industrial dispute, a big one, when if it's like a little one involving like a small company or something, it's different. But if it's like a big national one, affecting a lot of workers, around the negotiating table, you have the employers, you have the union representing the workers, and then you have mediators. The government are the mediators. When it's a big strike, it needs to be the Secretary of State or a junior minister. So if Labour want to look like the party of government rather than the party of protest, it was strategically sound. However, any plan is only as good as the people who have to carry it out. Now, if I explain, for example, as a teacher, for example, people may say, well, do you know what? The best way to learn is just to sit down, shut up, and listen to me and write all this stuff down. Like they do in like Tom Brown's School Days type thing, the old Victorian learn by rote situation. Just write reams and reams of notes, things like that. Learn facts, learn facts, learn facts. The problem is that it's boring and kids these days lack any sort of deference, so you would never get away with it. So you have to, when you're teaching, work out what can you realistically get them to learn and to make it as engaging as you possibly can, and hope that as a science teacher they avoid weaponizing the power packs, which occasionally was a problem for me. So that's the same situation Starmer was in reality. If he says, oh, don't join the picket line, the question should have been asked, do Labour MPs have the discipline to follow that instruction? The answer is no, they do not. and now an unholy mess has been caused. And it's not like Starmer was trying to make out that he wasn't on the side of the strikers. He said right at the start of the RMT's action, he made it known that he supported them because it wasn't acceptable to be taking a real terms pay cut like this. But the problem is, and I've said this before, I might have mentioned it a couple of weeks ago as well, people sort of assume that Labour leadership must be getting something wrong because why would the unions be attacking them? You have to bear in mind, unions will talk about the fact all the time that, you know, unions formed the Labour Party and all the rest of it. The unions are not on the side of a Labour government necessarily. Some will be and some won't be. Very much down to individual union leaders. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, you have to always think about motivation. If you're a union leader who's very good at organising strike action, and if you're a union that finds it easy to attract new members when, because bear in mind, and I would advise this, at the moment, people will be advised, join a union. I would always have been in a union anyway. I mean, I'm a teacher. Teaching is the most unionised profession. Any teacher that's not in a union must be mad. But it's got nothing to do with pay and conditions. But you know, at the moment, there's an absolute imperative. Every worker should be part of a union because workers' pay and rights are being attacked like at no other time. Well, certainly for decades. And then you think to yourself, so the current situation is very good for union leaders. Very good for union leaders. They're swelling their memberships, we presume, and they're getting to, you know, justify their existence. So then you think, so what would happen if we had a Labour government and they managed the economy better so that just like under the last Labour government, people were getting on average above inflation pay rises without the need for lots of industrial action? Yes, you'll still have strikes from time to time. Is it then harder for some of these union leaders to justify their existence? Because what is then the union for? I would argue the union therefore is, in that situation, there to protect, as it is for me as a teacher, to protect individuals from individual employers who abuse their legal rights, as well as to campaign for stronger rights as well. It's not as sexy doing that, is it, as launching a full-scale strike? So that's my issue there. But so I think on the one hand, you know, there are Labour MPs and there are union leaders, and it's in their interest for the Conservatives to be in power. It's much easier for them to do their job with the Conservatives in power, right? On the other hand, Starmer should have probably recognised a few things and come to some compromise on it. That's what maybe attend picket lines in your own constituency. So that's my view on the Labour situation. I'll just check if there was any little comments in there to throw into the mix while I go on to what should be the much more serious situation of how the Tories are going to deal with it. So let's have a look. Oh, will the strikes have an impact on the Rugby League World Cup? I suppose so. I mean, the strikes will be expected this autumn to be quite wide-ranging, you know, affecting an awful lot of workers. I mean, here's the thing. This is what, when Liz Truss, I did a video, it was yesterday or the day before, I can't remember. So when Liz Truss said, with the Bank of England news, that we are going into a fairly lengthy recession, and she said she would avert the recession, straight away I thought to myself, right, well, here's the thing. To avert a recession, you don't actually have to get the economy in good shape. A recession is where you have 2 periods of economic contraction. So the next quarter of this year, according to the Bank of England, is absolutely nailed on for contraction. That's all there is to it. The economy is contracting in the 4th quarter of 2022. But if it's in growth in the start of 2023, you avoid the recession. Now, in order to do that, you don't actually have to get the economy in good shape. You just have to have it do slightly better than in the previous quarter. But the industrial action poses a problem for Liz Truss, because the whole point of a strike, which is the last resort when other forms of negotiation and even less severe industrial action, because there are forms of industrial action that aren't full-blown strikes. When all that has failed, you are left with strike action as a last resort. And the whole point of it is to knacker the economy. You know, it's and when you've got a lot of professions that are planning on going on strike. So we've already had rail workers, we've now had train drivers as well, with postal workers. I don't know whether they're still voting for it, but there's been a campaign for some time from the Communication and Workers Union. Barristers have been on strike. But add to that, we're also going to have teachers and nurses, airport staff. I think one of those was averted, actually. I think there was an agreement on that. But there's lots of sectors of our economy that's talking about going on strike, and that'll have a massive hit to the economy. So, and the thing is, Truss, yeah, the Conservatives, we know what they're going to try because they've already tried it. Oh, Amazon workers. I mean, there's going to be loads, right? And the thing is, the more professions that go on strike, the easy. It's like coalesces, doesn't it? Like, you know, more and more of them will join in because it'll become more newsworthy and therefore more likely to succeed. You know, because for every worker that goes on strike, if there's more and more of them doing it, it makes the chances of you being successful in your demands greater. So it's the actual government are in real trouble here, because they'll call them the labour strikes. They'll blame Labour, which is why the unions aren't, if they are wanting a Labour government and they actually do want what's best for their members, because there will be some who do, then it's absolute madness to be blaming Labour more than the Conservatives who are actually in power, because that's feeding into the Conservative narrative of, you know, this is Labour's fault, not ours fault. But I will say this, ultimately it won't wash with the public. The public will punish the party in power if there is major disruption to the economy. And bear in mind what the Bank of England are forecasting. They're forecasting this lengthy recession. They're also forecasting a steep rise in unemployment. You know, the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, has particularly cited problems with labour supply. You know, he says businesses are constantly telling him they can't get the workers. So, and the Conservatives have no solution to it. There are solutions to it, but none of which they can find palatable. And Liz Truss, going back to that issue of who would be better, Sunak or Truss, Liz Truss is the most tied to the far right, who don't just have a twisted political ideology. It's in their interests for the UK to do poorly economically. You would think they want to keep it on life support just so they can win elections, but they represent people who make a lot of money when the UK economy suffers. You know, there are Tory backers, Brexit backers, who made an absolute killing off the back of Brexit. But anyway, if Q4 this year was so bad that Q1 next year had to be better by default, that I'd do for it. See, that's exactly what I was thinking. You know, if the impact of these strikes was such that it completely destroyed the economy, like really shrank the economy down in the last quarter of this year, maybe the GDP, because what they're doing is the Bank of England have worked out what they reckon is the GDP for the last quarter of this year, and they've gone, oh, that's whatever, 9% less than now, because at the moment it's in growth. So in this quarter right now, GDP has risen compared to the previous quarter, right? But the fourth quarter say no, it's going to be way less. But if it was way less, if it was like really, really bad, to the point where the GDP they're anticipating for January through to March would be better, then all of a sudden you're into growth. You know, it's not an economy that's doing well, it's just did a little bit better than when it was utterly crushed. But I still don't see how that's going to be possible, because the first quarter of a year is very tricky for trade anyway. And the industrial action, it's not like you have a strike and it hurts productivity and then the strike's over and you get back up to it. You know, you can damage productivity beyond the length of the strike, because you massively disrupt the supply chain. If you've got a wide ranging strike, if you've got lots of different workers in lots of different industries, then you hit the supply chains, which take a long time to re-establish themselves. My daughter's watching this with me and says she hates the Tories but wonders if it will get better. Find that quite sad if someone that young has nothing better to look forward to than me. Ultimately, things always do. There is a difference between whether it gets better or whether it gets good enough. That's a bigger issue, because at the moment it's not as like, there's been lots of times in my past and in my youth where, as far as I was concerned, the difference between life being good and not was who won the election, and that was all I saw to it. The Tories would be in power if Labour won, and that only happened once in my conscious life. In fact, no, once in my life. Yeah, Labour have only won power once in my life. I'm 46. They were in power when I was born, but they'd already won power then and were about to lose it. And that's all it ever was. But at the moment, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so if there's an election, and whether that's election, I mean, I notice Liz Truss has now ruled out a general election this year. Oh, absolutely ruled it out, completely out the question, which probably means there will be one. Because I remember when Theresa May said that. But assuming that there isn't, or whether there is or isn't, I don't necessarily think that removing the Tories instantly makes things better, because they've caused so much damage that it's not a quick or an easy fix. And my issue is, I'd be a lot more confident if the Labour Party that is now, I'd be a lot more confident if, just, you know, as in with the last Labour government, if I could be fairly sure it would give itself a good decade or more in power, then I would breathe a bit easier, because then they do have time to do things. The worry is that they have next to no time to fix a lot of problems. And the thing is as well, you've only got so much parliamentary time, so there are only so many problems you can fix straight away. And I can see it coming. You know, they'll prioritise, and then the people who think certain things should be fixed and aren't being at the time will then say, call it betrayal or something. Oh, they're not dealing with this. And it's like, well, you've only got so much parliamentary time. Tories will try anti-trade union laws. Well, they're certainly talking about it. They are talking about it. Part of me wonders, though, because they've only got so much parliamentary time as well. Part of me wonders if there's a few things they wouldn't just keep on the back burner for the next election. Because for the next general election, they need more promises, don't they? You know, I mean, granted, they tend to recycle their promises quite a lot, because it's quite easy. They get a load of campaign promises that appeal to voters, and they go, okay, we'll promise to do these things, great. And then they just don't do them. So then at the next election, they can promise the same things. And no one ever says, hang on, didn't you promise to do that last time? They just go, oh, that's a good idea. It's like, oh, we'll promise to do this thing. Oh, I like that. Good, I'll vote for you. 5 years later, we'll promise to do this thing. Oh, I like that. They don't think to themselves, hang on, I voted for you last time to do this and you haven't done it. So, yeah. PR is the only policy worth pursuing. It is my highest priority. I genuinely don't know whether they will. Like, it's very difficult to know, because you can look at the situation, and the Labour leadership are reported as being very cool on the idea of Westminster electoral reform. And that may be true. The thing is that there is strategic benefit on being cool on it now and announcing it at the last minute, because they can wait until the election campaign. They can stick it in the manifesto and it's all fine. They don't have to spend years leading up to it. If they think it's easier to blindside their opponents by sticking it in the manifesto at the last minute, they can absolutely do that. And if they win power, then they've got the mandate. They can go ahead with it. But I don't know whether they will. Because on the one hand, at the moment, they're not publicly getting behind it. So there's always got to be that element of doubt. But yeah, on the other hand, there is strategic benefit in playing your cards close to your chest on this one. So it'll just be a wait and see from me. But it is, for me, nothing that the next government can do, nothing that it can do to reverse the damage that the Tories have done is permanent without proportional representation. And I don't want to make out that proportional representation is some great panacea and everything will be... We've had enough people talking about sunlit uplands, haven't we? You know, I don't imagine that it's going to solve all our problems, but it does solve several of them. It prevents a very small, narrow interest group from taking control of the entire government. It doesn't make it impossible, but they have to work a lot harder to do it, which means it will happen less often. I mean, I am mindful of the fact that in Italy, there is a far-right government about to form, or has it formed now? I haven't actually paid enough attention to it. So you can't rule it out completely, but, you know, it's like the Conservatives would come back to power at some point under proportional representation. But it's very unlikely to be without having to form a coalition with someone else, and therein will lie their problem. And what it means is any party that goes into coalition with them will have more power. Like the Liberal Democrats often complain that they were unfairly tarred with the austerity brush because they, you know, had to form that coalition to stabilise the government. I completely disagree. I've talked about this before, but that's their argument. But in a situation where coalitions are the norm, all of a sudden you don't need that argument, because it can be just like, okay, we'll form a coalition with some other people if you won't be sensible. But anyway. If Labour truly care about saving people from the Tories long term, the only way to do that is PR. Anything else guarantees another Tory government and more of the same misery. Yes, at some point, yes. This is the problem. The issue is, of course, the Labour Party is not some paragon of virtue. It's a political party, and it's a broad political party, as it has to be in order to ever win power in a first past the post system, which means there are lots of people that make it up who have their own interests, and those interests are not generally aligned. In a lot of cases, not all cases, obviously, they're not generally aligned with people. So that is always going to be the issue. The thing at the moment, though, is there is a lot of support for PR within the party. So there is always that. Do I only ever wear hoodies? It varies from time to time, but I very often wear hoodies, yes. Do I think if I wore a shirt and tie it would appear to be centre, left or right? No, I wore them for work when I was a teacher. That's fine. Although I have to say I wouldn't fit into the one I wore last time I was a teacher, because I put on too much weight, which I need to lose. I am actually in the process of losing again, but I did put on a lot of weight over the pandemic, and it was yeah, so I wouldn't actually fit into them anymore, and I'm not buying one just for you guys. As an East German living in Switzerland, I learned 3 voting systems in my life, but ours seems to be the most effed up. If such a government can stay in power for 12 years, that wouldn't even be heard of in the GDR. I don't mind that as such. Like, you know, stability is fine if the government is doing its job. That's all fine. The issue is when it doesn't, when not only is the government not doing its job, but it is not even represent. I can't even say, well, do you know what? It's just because our media gaslight the public and con them into voting Tory, because they don't. You know, the majority of people don't vote for the Conservatives. They vote for other parties. And you know, if there'd have been proportional representation at the last election, and if people had have voted the same way at the last, which wouldn't have happened, because if you have a different system, of course people will change the way they vote. But if people had, we wouldn't have left the EU. We would not have left the EU. And that is the difference between proportional representation and first past the post. Huge difference it would have made to this country. In fact, we would never have had the Brexit referendum in the first place. But anyway, do I think if Labour held a rejoin referendum and won, then the Tories come to power again, they would respect the result. Well, that's the issue. There can't be until the Tories are ready to respect the result. That's what I keep trying to explain to people who are calling for us to rejoin. The EU, various figures in the EU have made it very, very clear they are not going to even entertain the notion of us rejoining. They want us to rejoin, but they cannot do it on a practical level until the issue is politically settled. You know, it's a bit like, you know, Ukraine is on this fast track to join the EU, but it can't join the EU until it's secured its own borders. So Russia's causing a bit of a problem there. And in this country, it's the Tories causing a problem. You know, because at the moment, the Tories wouldn't. If they lost power right now, if Labour said we want to, you know, take steps to rejoin the EU, they couldn't. The EU would say, no, we're not even going to talk about it. And that's why, you know, I wish more people would understand that. That's why Labour cannot talk about rejoining the EU, because all it's going to do is it's going to piss off the people who are sick of the Brexit divisions. And I cannot emphasise just how much polling makes it clear, of all sorts of polling, internal party polling as well as more public polling, just how much people want to move on from it. It's not that, you know, people are happy with Brexit. They just saw years and years of political paralysis and divisions in society, in the most unpleasant politics, and they don't want it carrying on. But yeah, it's so that's the issue. If Labour just said, look, we're going to do all these things, we're going to step by step, but maybe what we'd like to work towards is in 15 years time rejoining the EU, say, the EU would immediately say no, not until the issue is politically settled. And that means any government that could reasonably form in the next few decades has to be on board with the idea. So either the Tories need to be on board with the idea of rejoining, and the single market, first of all, before we can even think about rejoining the EU, the single market and the customs union, Tories have to get on board with that. They will have to, because it's the only thing that makes sense economically. Right now, the Tories aren't in favour of Brexit. Like, Tory MPs, by and large, are not in favour of Brexit. They've just been taken over. So the issue just needs sorting there. The only alternative is to make sure you make it absolutely impossible for the Tories ever to take power again. Well, even with proportional representation, you can't do that. So that's all there is to it. Do I think the current leadership contest could end up having the largest effect on losing red wall voters due to things like Truss's U-turn in regional public sector wages and Rishi's recent speech? I mean, the red wall should have gone anyway. The damage should have already been done. But it has to be said that the Tories are getting a bounce back in most of the polls I'm seeing. It's really weird that Ipsos Mori doesn't really show that. That's weird. And they're ones I rate, so I'm a bit unsure about what's going on. But I would certainly anticipate a bounce back, because a lot of the blame was put on Boris Johnson, right? Not the Conservative Party. So the job for Labour now that Johnson is going is to make sure it sticks to the Labour Party, to the Labour Party, bloody hell, to the Conservative Party. It should be quite easy, but it'll just, what's going to happen is the polls won't look very good for Labour for the next couple of months, and everyone will lose their shit, because they'll go, oh no, the Tories changed their leader and they've reversed the polls, it's all disaster, oh my god, we need a new Labour leader, this is a mess. In reality, no. People are just getting ready to pin all the blame on the leader, which is reasonable, and then say, well, they're getting a new leader in, they might be better. So the public are going to give the new leader, which is probably Liz Truss, the benefit of the doubt. They won't put up with her for very long, because, you know, you'd get a longer honeymoon period if things are sort of going all right. Maybe there's things to fix, but it's sort of okay. Things are not okay. Things are going to get a lot worse. In fact, when these new energy price increases come in, Liz Truss will have been Prime Minister for several months. So September, I would anticipate her, you know, basically Labour have just, and Starmer's just got to start piling the pressure on her. But don't expect too much in September. In October, that's when she's going to start exposing herself, not literally, and then November I would anticipate the bounce back I would hope will be over. I'm not going to speak as some detailed pollster, but I would anticipate that come November it will all start going to shit for the Tories again. I mean, if you just think about everything that's coming, we are going to have contraction of the economy. That contraction generates job losses heading into winter. The NHS is going to fail very badly. The people are going to find short things, you know, they're going to struggle to just get basic foods even. We're going to be able to get food, but it's going to cost a lot more and much less choice. You know, and Liz Truss's plans that she says are there to fix the economy will do the opposite. There's no question about it. And if she doesn't go for a general election this year, if she doesn't, and as I said in the video when I talked about it, I can see strategic benefit for the Tories going for a quick election, because they might even just sneak it, although it'd be difficult to see, but they could certainly limit the damage. But I don't see it as in Liz Truss's interest to call a general election this year. So she'd have to be bounced into it. But if she doesn't, she can't afford to go to the polls next year, because next year all her lies are exposed. All this thing about I can avert the recession, we'll be in recession next year. We won't be in recession this year, because at the moment we're in growth. So the recession starts on the second period of contraction. So the recession is next year. It's forecast to be all of next year. And I sometimes wonder if when the Bank of England, because it has to be said, I'm not a student of economics, so I can't say how their predictions have gone over the last few decades or anything, but I have noticed over the last few years that whenever the Bank of England have forecast something, it's always been on the optimistic side. And you ask why that is, and sometimes I wonder if the reason why it is because they're looking at the various factors that will impact the economy, and they assume certain actions from the government. In other words, they factor into their model a government that has some interest in growing the economy, and then it turns out the government don't have any interest in growing the economy, so then their forecast, which has as part of its model a functioning government, falls down. So I wonder if this quite happens a lot. Serious question, how much damage can Truss do to the country before we get rid of it? Yeah, it is quite a lot. I'll go with that comment from John. It's quite a lot. She could have 2.5 years, well, a little over 2 years as Prime Minister. In that time, she can bring in some of the more extreme stuff, like leaving the European Court of Human Rights. You'd have to leave the Council of Europe for a start. It's very messy. It's not going to happen. But that's not to say she's already talking about making certain protests illegal. Well, they've already made peaceful protest illegal. How much bloody further does she want to go? You know, she's absolutely going to be about the culture wars. Right, if you're a party of government, if you're the head of government and you're looking at general elections in 2.5 years' time, what do you want to fight that campaign on? If you've been in government and your party's been in government for well over a decade, what do you want to fight it on? You want to fight it on the strength of the economy. The economy is going to be weak. You want to fight it on the fact that people have got access to good healthcare, because British people care about that healthcare shot. You know, you want to push the idea of people are doing better. You know, people are doing well. You know, their pay's okay. They're getting a decent amount of pay for their honest day's toil. Well, that's not happening either. You know, the standard of living is going down. So, what? She could declare war on Russia. That'd be a bold move. We can't. We couldn't even declare war confidently on the Isle of Wight. Yeah, if you look at what a party in government would want to fight an election on, they're not going to have any of that ammunition. So they have to fight it on ideology. They have to fight it on their culture wars. They have to divide and rule, the oldest trick, divide and conquer. That's what they need to do. So she's going to push that She's going to push those culture wars. She doesn't want to be Prime Minister for just a couple of years. She wants to do what Boris Johnson did and win an election and secure her legacy. So to do that, she's going to need to get people to vote for her, despite the fact she's clearly ruining their lives. She has to convince them that voting for the alternative is somehow worse. That will become more difficult with a Labour Party that is now focused on capturing the centre ground of politics. But that just means she'll have to be ever more extreme with her policies. That's all. Phil, who do the polls ask? I've never been asked. I'm 50. Have you ever signed up? You do sort of have to sign up to be asked. I'm seriously concerned. They said Truss is exposing herself. Mental health services are bad enough as it is. Yeah. I meant figuratively. Jacob Rees-Mogg's plan to take us back in time is succeeding as we revisit the winter of discontent. Well, it is going to be. And I mean, the thing is, obviously, at the last, the so-called winter of discontent in the late 70s, obviously there was a general election straight after it. Okay, so it was absolute curtains. The Conservatives here are in a position where they've got a good couple of years more that they can wait, but you just don't see how it's going to improve, and it could get worse. I mean, I will remind people who may not know, Tory Party HQ in was it last year or was it the year before? It was the year before. So the year before, towards the end of that, when they were looking forward to coming out of the pandemic, they were eyeing up an early general election. They were eyeing up summer 2022, maybe late 2021, autumn 2021, summer 2022 for a general election, because they thought, right, because they knew that the economy was going to get worse and worse. This isn't a surprise from the Bank of England, this forecast. It's what everyone who's been paying attention has known is coming for a long time. And the Conservatives knew that. So they were getting themselves ready to fight a general election before the economic shitstorm hit. The problem was that in late 2021, they lost their poll lead. If they'd have maintained it through the vaccine boost, then there would have been a general election by now. But they couldn't. They lost it. And it was a sustained loss. And they've only now been able to turn it back by getting rid of Boris Johnson. But the problem now is they are stuck with this recession. So they've left it too late. So it might be a case of, so although it was the case before, better to have a general election earlier rather than later, because things are only going to get worse year on year. There might be a situation where now it's a case of things are so bad that maybe it wouldn't be any worse if they left it another 2 years. And in that 2 years, Liz Truss can do an awful lot of damage in government. Massive amount of damage. It just has to be hoped that she has such a poor grasp of tactics and that she doesn't listen to advice from sound strategists, that she pisses off the public as badly as Boris Johnson did. Because then they're knackered. I mean, they're stuck then. If they find themselves in that position, they're completely stuck. If the government knew there was going to be a shitstorm, why didn't they actually try and fix it? Because the shitstorm was caused by what they wanted to do in government, which is to raid the public coffers and bring in a hard Brexit. Both of those things make it impossible to achieve a strong economy. You've raised trade barriers with your customers. This is not unlike a shopkeeper putting an obstacle course in their front door. Yes, you can come in and buy things, but you've got to do the obstacle course first. Well, that's going to reduce your custom. And also, they're wasting as much public money as they can to reward donors and themselves. And the problem with that is like spending the maintenance and utility budgets. So this shop is now operating with peeling wallpaper and the lights going out because they haven't paid the electricity bill. What is Paladin? Well, it's many things, but in this particular context, it relates to Dungeons and Dragons. They're basically characters in several fantasy role-playing games that hit things with a big hammer whilst pretending to be good people. By the way, I know someone who spoke to Jacob Rees-Mogg online, thought he was in Westminster Library. No, in his house, 17th century idiot. Most MPs don't go anywhere near the Westminster Library, it has to be said. And he is an idiot. He is an absolute idiot. He is the classic case of someone with a private education who talks with a posh accent, and therefore people think he knows things. He knows nothing. He knows nought. But anyway, if Callaghan, so this was the Labour leader who lost to Margaret Thatcher, had gone to the country in October 78, he could well have won. History would have been different. Yeah, well, this is the thing. He chickened out basically, didn't he? I think I was far too young, of course. I was like 2 years old at the time. But in fact, technically, I'd have been 1 year old at the time he was being advised for that, wouldn't I? Yes, because yeah. So, but I gather he was advised and didn't. And it is a problem. It's always the problem in politics. In this country, because of course you don't have fixed terms for parliaments. If you wait the full 5 years, the problem is something can go wrong, as it did in 1979. So that's why the political wisdom is to have a general. If you're looking good in the 4th year, have a general election after 4 years. That's quite normal, because if you leave it till the 5th year, something will go wrong. And because of that, the only reason why a government wouldn't go for a general election after 4 years, there's only one reason, and that's because things aren't going well for them, and they're hoping things will go better in the next year. And that is why, since the war, there have only been 3 election wins for the party in government if they've waited the full 5 years. I think I checked that out one time. So out of all the general elections that have occurred that have gone to the full 5 years, only 3 times has the government actually won it. And even then it was short-lived sometimes. So Clement Attlee, he won in 1945, of course. He won again in 1950, but his government only lasted a few months because it was very weak. So he lost straight away. So he couldn't even hold on to the win. But it was technically a win. Liz Truss is not a paladin now. She would be a warlock if I was to pick a fantasy trope for her. She would be a warlock. Sacrificing innocence to the dark gods. But anyway, isn't the Fixed Term Parliament Act already repealed? Well, yeah, but it didn't fix parliaments either, did it? We had the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, and then we had an election in 2015, fine. Then we had, and that's one of the other 3 times when the party in government actually won after 5 years. And then in fact, Labour won 1, Tories won 2, because John Major won in 1992. Then we had one in 2017. So the Fixed Terms Parliament Act wasn't really doing what was it wasn't doing what was intended. Then we had another one in 2019. So it has now been repealed, so people can stop this now. The Fixed Terms Parliament Act, in reality, was never designed to fix parliaments in time. It could never do that, because it was just an act, a parliament. It wasn't a constitutional change. But anyway. When I worked as a dustman, paladins were big cylindrical commercial waste bins. Oh. Okay. Have you missed the bit about the strikes? Yeah, sorry. We've diverged somewhat. But it's obviously, you can always watch this afterwards as well. I just went over some. I thought you can always throw something out here. We seem to be in the period now where I'm just going to respond to whatever comes up in the chat. But yeah, so can they stay on for more than 5 years now? Technically, yes. So what happens is the government should trigger an elect. It still needs, it's like the Prime Minister can't just do it themselves. They still need a majority of MPs to support it if it's going to be an early one. But as the Tories have a majority of MPs, and as Labour wouldn't be at all opposed to a general election, then that should be fine. So the last general election was on something of December. I've forgotten, the 12th or 19th something. If they don't trigger it by then automatically a process has started to trigger it. But a general election campaign lasts about 6 or 7 weeks. So they can have been in power for more than 5 years. So what will happen is, when it gets to the point where it's 5 years since the last general election and the Tories still haven't called an election, then the process starts automatically. At that point, it's out. They have no say in the matter. It just starts. But you can't have a general election the following day. It's like 6 or 7 weeks. So the reality is, there's some date in January when, I'm going to see if I can remember it. Probably can't. There's some date in January where if the Tories didn't trigger a general election, it would just automatically happen. 23rd of January rings a bell. So the 23rd of January is the latest there can possibly be a general election. Unless they actually turn us into a dictatorship, but I think they'll struggle to do that in 2.5 years. Don't say they can stay on. They can't stay on beyond January 2025, but they can. As I say, they're not forced to trigger a general election. It's just that constitutionally, if they don't trigger a general election, then 5 years after the previous one, it starts automatically. Surely the general election should be triggered 6 weeks before the 5th anniversary. It's not how it works. No. So again, I mean, it'll be, the thing is though, if they don't trigger and it all happens automatically, that's not a good, I don't think that'll necessarily happen. It's not a good position for the Tories to be in, because first of all, it looks like they're in hiding because they didn't trigger the election. It was done automatically. So it's like they don't want the election. That's always a very bad look. It's always quite a bad look to the public, that they needed, if the process had to be started automatically, it means that they've no confidence they're going to win it. And you'll get Tory members, oh yeah, of course we're going to win, of course we're going to win. We've absolutely got the confidence of the public. And straight away someone will ask, so why didn't you trigger the general election then? Why have we got to wait till January? And the other thing is, like, do they really want it in January when the economic bad times are still going to be there? Not that I know when they're going to be able to pick economically good times, but there will be better times than a January where trade is already suppressed. Ministers urged to scrap voter ID, article by Mikey Smith in the Mirror. I've not seen that, but at the end of the day, I mean, something in the Mirror is not really going to impress the Tories, because it tends to focus a bit more on left-wing stuff. I have often wondered though, because the voter ID thing is clearly aimed at voter suppression. The issue is that it might be based on a fallacy, in that you think, so someone like me naturally carries around my driving license in my wallet, so I'm covered. I don't even have to remember to take it with me, I'm covered. Lots of people will do the same thing. And so who won't? Well, people who don't have driving licenses. They may have a passport, but you don't routinely carry your passport around with you, right? As far as photo IDs go, driving license is the most common one that people will just naturally take out with them without a specific reason for needing it. So you're talking about people who are not likely to have a driving license. Well, that's going to be poorer people, and maybe older people, very older people. And then you think to yourself, so you may think that poorer people tend to vote Labour more, so it's been done to hurt Labour voters. But then you think, hang on a minute, politics is very strange these days. Forget about the way it was decades ago. The Conservatives created their sort of new empire after 2019 on the backs of conning poorer people who were clearly being shafted by the political system that they created. So that's a lot of their voters now, whereas Labour appeal much more to the middle classes and the more affluent of the working classes as well. So in terms of the demographics, it could actually hurt the Tories more than Labour. I mean, I don't know, but there is certainly that potential. You say I could call my stream live from the Paladin now. I did toy with the idea when I did the channel at the start of calling it Paladin Politics, because I started YouTube with a gaming channel with a particular game that I still, well, I've come, you know, play now and then, where in any such game I always play a Paladin if I can, because I always like them, but they're always terrible. But anyway, glad I'm feeling better. Oh yeah, I'm better. I'm quite pleased it was just an infection in my leg and not a blood clot. It's very weird how an infection, I'm not a doctor, it's very weird how an infection can just affect like a little bit of your leg. But it was what it was. Say, can Labour unite the country around a focus on PR to obtain a majority from all of us desperate for some progressive change? I don't know. I honestly don't know. That's the problem. I can see the argument that if Labour got fully behind PR, properly behind it, yes, of course, they would attract Green voters and Lib Dem voters in the seats they're trying to capture. But are there, in the seats they're trying to capture, are there that many? That's the problem. And if it puts off more of their target voters than it encourages, obviously it's a net vote loser. But I genuinely don't know. Like, you can look at it empirically and you can say, you know, loads of Lib Dem, Greens and others as well would vote for it just to finally get PR so that at the next general election they can cast their vote and it will count, you know, and in their area they can have a Green MP or a Liberal Democrat MP. Well, all of them, all the colours of the rainbow in that local region, including unfortunately the purple of UKIP, but you know, or the Reform UK, whichever ones they emerges. But that's just the price you pay. Don't worry, they'll be sat on the opposite. I'm quite happy for Reform UK and UKIP to get the odd MP, because they'll be sat on the opposition benches and they'll not be able to misbehave like they did in the European Parliament, because their members will expect them to show a bit of respect. But anyway, what game? World of Warcraft. Played that for a long time. The gaming channel is still cool. But I haven't really known what to do with it for several years now. Benches, and they'll not be able to misbehave like they did in the European Parliament. You're a doctor and glad I didn't have a clot. Well, I'm very glad I didn't have a clot. Because I mean, in my particular case as well, I mean, it was very much, well actually no, the first thing I thought, because it was quite minor on the morning it happened, was an insect bite, but I could see no sign of it. I did have a friend who had a clot, and it was quite clear. Unfortunately, it was by the time I found out what his symptoms were, I had no idea. It was too late. So he had some reddening and soreness on his thigh. In my case, it was low down the leg and his thigh. And he'd fainted as well. And he'd gone to the doctor, but he'd gone to his GP, and his GP just sent him away. Just said, no, I'm not doing anything. And then he died a week later. And you know, so that was very much in my mind. You know, so there was no question of me going to a GP. I was straight to A&E, not messing about. We've got an echo. Oh, sorry, hold on. Should go away. I think I had a window open by mistake. Sorry. God, how long has that been happening there? But anyway, there we go. Let's go through the last few, the last 5 minutes. Hi Phil, Britain, Germany here. Watch every day to keep up with the news. I have a question. Do I think Labour will ever have a chance if they don't become active on social media? Well, they will. They probably will win the next general election. But it's like, you know, they would massively improve their ability to get messages out if they use social media. The bottom line is the Conservatives have the mainstream media by and large in their corner. You know, although not all of the mainstream media shill for them. If you look at the most popular ones do, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Daily Telegraph, the Sun, they're all in the Tories' corner, and Labour don't have that, and they're never going to get it, because do you know what? You're not going to get socialist billionaire philanthropists buying up the British media to redress the balance. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. So they have to do it themselves. Now, social media gives you the opportunity to do it yourself, and they do not take advantage of it, and it's absolutely mad. I did think a little while ago, because Graham Hughes has been on at this with them, and he's been talking to them, and I did think he was going to get a bit of a breakthrough, and I thought we were going to start getting somewhere, but no, that seems to have, I don't know what's happened to it. It certainly seems to be in stasis at the moment. They're unbelievably thick when it comes to communication. The audio is not still repeating, is it? Because if it is, I really don't know what the reason for that would be. What would change under PR? Example, boundaries, number of seats, and so on. Yeah, some things would have to change because you'd have a regional list. So there's different ways you can do it. I would certainly increase the number of seats to help accommodate it. See, if you look at what Wales are doing, so Wales are going for proportional representation. So they have a model which means they twin constituencies, and they're going to increase the number of seats in their parliament. So what it means is lumping two constituencies together, which at the moment would be 2 MPs, but increasing the number of MPs. So yeah, so you'd have to do something like that, or you'd have to lump a right load of constituencies together, you know, and you could maybe maintain the number of MPs. I've got no problem with more MPs there, none at all. But something would have to change, of course, to accommodate it. Why would anyone be against proportional representation? If you are a Tory, then you are in power almost all the time under first past the post. You would almost never be in power under proportional representation until they massively reform themselves, and they'd have to reform themselves towards the centre, which if you are very right wing, you're not going to be happy about, right? It's a little bit like, you know, the main difference between the left wing and the right wing in terms of how they perceive political systems is the left wing can get on board with it, with proportional representation, because they look at the situation and think, some of them think if they just hold on, they can get another very left-wing leader in charge of Labour, and they think they're going to have these stars align where they get someone in control when the Tories have been in power for a long time, and they can have these stars align so that their very left-wing Labour leader wins an election, becomes Prime Minister, and everything is glorious from there on in. And it's all madness. But I think most people on the left recognise it hasn't happened for 200 years. It's probably not going to happen. Whereas if you're on the very far right, it's happened right now. So they can realistically win. So people on the very far right, or even not mid-right, are in favour of first past the post because they get more of what they want, or what they think they want. You think Labour are afraid of losing control of the message on social media? That is absolutely a core part of it. Yes, you're right there. It's about trusting people. They're a bit too control freakery. The problem is, though, that they need something because it's not working. They're not getting their message through to people. Knocking on doors can only get round to so many people, and then you're at the mercy of the person knocking on the door. You need an absolute army of activists to go door knocking. And I don't wish to criticise, because they're putting in the hard yards, and I've got every respect for people who do it, because it's not always a pleasant experience going around door knocking, and it is a lot of time and effort. But not everyone who does it is very persuasive. Not everyone who does it will focus on the key issues that might persuade the person they're talking to. Not everyone is astute. So what you need is a megaphone. You need fewer people. Well, obviously you still want your activist door knocking, but you want fewer people who are better at getting a message out, getting your message out. But anyway. Starmer's working on a book to be published by Murdoch, so how is that not part of a problem? I've no idea about anything to do with a book, but I do know this. If you get in a book published, it doesn't matter who publishes it. Like, I will go to get my groceries from wherever is most convenient for me, where I can buy my stuff. I don't look to see who owns the company. I will go to a Tory greengrocer to get my apples without any problem at all. I think people need to, appreciate that I mean, I know some people will boycott all sorts of companies on the basis of, of the political leanings of a company. I am much more of the mind, look, if I go to a greengrocer run by a Tory, their apples are just as good as one that's run by a Labour activist. It's an apple. And as long as they're a good greengrocer, it'll be a good apple. And it's the same thing with any number of things. If he is writing a book and it is being published by a Murdoch's company, it's not giving Murdoch a foot in the door at number 10, is it? It's the same with like when people criticise writing in like the Sun or something like that. It's how you get through to people. Labour, to win power, have got to get through to people who don't vote Labour but might vote Labour, which means you've got to engage with Sun readers, Daily Mail readers, Daily Express readers, Telegraph readers. Boycott the oil companies. Yeah, unfortunately I've got a car. This is tricky. What about Wetherspoons? Well, see, I do actually boycott Wetherspoons, but the reason I don't like look down my nose at people who don't. The reason I boycott Wetherspoons, there's two factors. First of all, at the end of the day, I haven't been to a pub for ages. I don't need to go to a pub, so it's no big deal for me to boycott any pub. But I was boycotting Wetherspoons before the pandemic, and I wasn't interested in going to pubs anymore. But the other reason is that he was so aggressively, Martin was so aggressive with his political stance. I wouldn't boycott necessarily Dyson. Dyson was a bit of a bell end, arguing for Brexit and then pissing off out the country. But he's not in your face about it. So I wouldn't necessarily, even though I haven't bought a Dyson, but I do actually, I've got a Dyson product right here. So I don't mind that. I don't like, but my attitude to boycotting is, first of all, can I do without it? Can I get it from somewhere else that's just as good and relatively as cheap? I'll pay a bit more because I can afford to pay a bit more. But I don't go, I'll quite happily go to a business and not care whether it's run by a Tory or Labour or whoever. I mean, bloody hell, I'd struggle to get anything if I refuse to do business with Conservatives. But if I can do without it, and I find the owner of the company particularly objectionable, then yeah, I do boycott it. What do I think of interviews? Have I ever considered interviewing anyone? I have actually approached some people before. Not as I wouldn't want to do it as habitually. I don't want to make a thing of it because I don't see myself as an interviewer. But occasionally I've thought, oh, I'm going to be doing this topic in like a month's time. Maybe I could, this MP is quite interested in that, and maybe I can get someone to talk about it. And it's never worked. I've never got anyone. So I just think, sod it. But yeah, I'm not naturally someone who would do a lot of it. I have interviewed, ironically, on my gaming channel some years ago. But I'm not driven enough to constantly chase people to interview like Max does interviews, so he will regularly get people on to do that with, whereas for me it's the sort of thing, every now and then it would be interesting, but every time I've tried it I've been knocked back. So You did door knock it. Door knocking is not easy. Even in a solid Labour area, you can get lammed for getting in the way of Corrie or EastEnders. Well, see, that's another thing. I don't like the concept of door knocking. I don't like to be disturbed, and I don't like the idea of disturbing people in their home. And I know you have to do it. I accept you have to do it, but yeah, it doesn't sit right with me, the whole thing. But I do have an awful lot of respect for people that do it. Say Murdoch backed Blair. They were particularly in bed together. Yeah, Blair's relationship with Murdoch was too close. It was too close. But anyway, right, we're going to have to call it there because the dogs need walking. We have actually taken to walking them in the mornings and weekdays, but not weekends. We do that in the evening now because we can't. Well, Sarah certainly can't be asked getting out of bed on a Saturday morning. So last one here, Alex Jones out for the count. Well, he's certainly, I gather, he's got a cough up $48 million. So yeah, there's that. Unfortunately, it's a civil case, so he doesn't get to go to prison. Unless he doesn't pay. Maybe he won't pay and then he'll go to prison. There we go. But we'll leave that one there. Have a good evening, everyone, and we'll be back on next week. Until next time, I will see you later.